Welcome to the Plain Mundane Show. I'm Alex Aquarius. We're going to read aloud The Babylon Working by Alexander Mitchell. This story is taken from issue number 35 of Insight magazine, a British publication on the occult. John Whiteside Parsons, a brilliant rocket fuel scientist, joined the American branch of Aleister Crowley cult in 1939. He struck up an earnest correspondence with the Beast 666, as Crowley was known by his followers, and soon became his outstanding protege in the United States. By January of 1946, Parsons was impatient to break new frontiers in the occult world. He decided to take the spirit of Babylon, the horror of Babylon, and invest it in a human being. But to carry out his intricate mission, Parsons needed a female sexual partner to create his child in the astral spiritual world. If this part of the fixture went successfully, Parsons would be able to call down the spiritual baby and direct it into a human womb. When born, this child would incarnate the forces of Babylon. During his magical preparations for this incarnation, Parsons found himself overwhelmed by assistance from a young novitiate named Ron Hubbard. Parsons wrote to Crowley at the beginning of 1946. He, Hubbard, is a gentleman, red hair, green eyes, honest and intelligent. We have become great friends. Although he has no formal training in magic, he has an extraordinary amount of experience and understanding in the field. Ron appears to have some sort of highly developed astral vision. He describes his angel as a beautiful winged woman with red hair whom he calls the Empress, and who has guided him through many times in his life. He is in complete accord with our own principles. I have found a staunch companion and comrade in Ron. But within 3 months, the bonds of friendship were under some strain. Ron claimed Parsons wrote to Crowley, "She has transferred her sexual affections to Ron. I cared for her rather deeply, but I have no desire to control her emotions." As if to cement their loyalties, Parsons, Hubbard, and Betty decided to pool their finances and form a business partnership. Meanwhile, preparations for the mystical mission were well underway. From January 4th to 15th, 1946, Parsons and Hubbard engaged in a nightly ritual of incantation, talisman waving, and other black magic, faithfully described in Parsons' diary as conjuration of air, invocation of wand, and consecration of air dagger, with a Prokofiev violin concerto blaring away. The two of them pleaded with the spirits for an elemental mate, a girl willing to go through sexual rites to incarnate Babylon in the spirit world. Parsons mentions that wind storms had occurred on a couple of nights, and one night the power suddenly failed, but nothing seriously responsive until January 14th, when Ron was struck on the right shoulder and had a candle knocked out of his hand. "He called me," Parsons wrote, "and we observed a brownish yellow light about 7 feet high. I brandished a magical sword and it disappeared." Ron's right arm was paralyzed for the rest of the night. The following night was even more portentous. Hubbard apparently saw a vision of one of Parsons' enemies. Parsons wrote, "He attacked the figure and pinned it to the door with 4 throwing knives, of which he is expert." For 4 days, Parsons and Hubbard were in a state of tension. Then on January 18th, Parsons turned to Ron and said, "It is done," he added. "I returned home and found a young woman answering the requirements waiting for me." The incarnate ritual set out in Parsons' manuscript, the Book of Babylon, is difficult reading for the unconfirmed spiritualist. Broadly interpreted, Parsons and Hubbard constructed an altar, and Hubbard acted as high priest during a series of ceremonies in which Parsons and the girl shared sex. The owner of the documents, who is an expert on Crowley's magic, says that Parsons at this stage was completely under Hubbard's domination. How else can one explain Hubbard's role as high priest and the rites after only a few weeks in the trade? For the first of the birth ceremonies, which began on March 1st, Hubbard wore a white robe and carried a lamp, while Parsons was clothed in a black hooded garment, carrying a cup and dagger. At Hubbard's suggestion, they played Rachmaninoff's Isle of the Dead as background music. Parsons' account of the start of the birth ritual is as follows. The scribe, Hubbard, said, "The year of Babylon is 4063. She is the flame of life, power of darkness. She destroys with a glance. She may take thy soul. She feeds upon the death of men, beautiful, horrible. The scribe, now pale and sweating, rested a while, then continued. There are two possible reasons why Hubbard showed anxiety at this stage of the ceremony. The owner of the paper writes, he was either deeply moved by the spiritual depth of the ceremony, or he couldn't think what to say next. Hubbard further instructed Parsons, display thyself to Our Lady, dedicate thy organs to her, display thy mind to her, dedicate thy soul to her, for she shall absorb thee. Retire from human contact until noon tomorrow. Speak not of this ritual, discuss nothing of it, consult no book but thine own mind. Thou art a god, behave at this altar as one god before another. On the third day, the ritual began 4 hours before dawn. Ron tells his companion, lay out a white sheet, place upon it blood of birth, envision her approaching thee, think upon the lewd, lascivious things thou couldst do. All is good to Babylon, all. Preserve the material basis, the lust is hers, the passion yours. Consider thou the beast raping. These invocations, along with other passages in the book, indicate that Parsons had collected specimens of his own sperm and the girl's menstrual fluid. The climax of the ceremony occurred the following day, with Ron at the altar working his two subjects into a sexual frenzy. Over Rachmaninoff, he intoned such gems as, her mouth is red, her breasts are fair, and her loins are full of fire. An exalted Parsons wrote the next day, Babylon is incarnate upon the earth today, awaiting the proper hour of her manifestation. And in that day my work will be accomplished, and I shall be blown away upon the breath of the Father, even as it is written. In fact, Parsons was blown away in a rocket fuel explosion at his experimental laboratory in Pasadena in 1952. Unable to contain his joy, Parsons decided to tell Crowley what had happened. On March 6th, he wrote, I can hardly tell you or decide how much to write. I am under command of extreme secrecy. I have had the most important, devastating experience of my life. Crowley was dumbfounded by the news of incarnation ceremony. He wrote back, you have me completely puzzled by your remarks. I cannot form the slightest idea of what you can possibly mean. With a distinct note of concern, he dashed off a letter on the same day to the head of his American cult, saying, apparently Parsons or Hubbard or somebody is producing a moonchild. I get fairly frantic when I contemplate the idiocy of these louts. This acid rebuke comes from a man whose activities were once summed up by a judge like this. I have never heard such horrible, dreadful, blasphemous stuff as that which has been produced by the man who describes himself as the greatest living poet. Speaking of Crowley, of course. By May the same year, Crowley was not only concerned about Parsons' spiritual well-being, there was a small matter of certain monies. When the trio formed their business enterprise, Parsons is believed to have put in $17,000. Hubbard had about $10,000 of the money. Hubbard and his newly acquired girlfriend Betty bought a yacht. A report to the head of the American branch by another cult member says, Ron and Betty have their boat at Miami, Florida, and are living the life of Riley, while brother John Parsons is living at rock bottom, and I mean rock bottom. In a more sinister way, the report added, let us consider this matter of the magical child which John Parsons is supposed to turn loose in the world in 9 months. Now 7. Ron, the seer, was the guy who laid down the main ideas, technique, etc. of the operation. On reading Parsons' accounts of the ceremony and from the reports of the branch headquarters in the States, Crowley cabled in his U.S. office on May 22nd. Suspect Ron, playing confidence trick. John Parsons, weak fool. Obvious victim, prowling swindlers. In a letter a few days later, he said, it seems to me on the information of our brethren in California that Parsons has got an illumination which he lost all his personal independence. From our brother's account, he has given away both his girl and his money. Apparently, it is the ordinary confidence trick. A much-chastened Parsons wrote to Crowley on July 5th. Here I am in Miami pursuing the children of my folly. I have them well tied up. They cannot move without going to jail. However, I am afraid that most of the money has already been spent. I will be lucky to salvage $3,000 to $5,000. Just how Parsons managed to capture the errant lovers is in keeping with the other extraordinary chapters of this story. Hubbard attempted to escape me, Parsons wrote, by sailing at 5 p.m. and performed a full invocation to Bartzabel within the circle at 8 p.m., a curse. At the same time, however, his ship was struck by a sudden squall off his sails and forced him back to port, where I took the boat in custody. Parsons recovered financially, and possibly as a backlash to his experience with Hubbard, he took the oath of the Antichrist in 1948 and changed his name to Belarian Armilus al-Dajjal Antichrist. In his Scientology publications, Hubbard says of the period, "Crippled and blind at the end of the year, I resumed my studies of philosophy and my discoveries recovered so fully that I was reclassified in 1949 for full combat duty." Hubbard claims that more than 24 thinkers, prophets, and psychologists influenced Scientology, which was launched in 1951. Everyone from Plato, Jesus, to Sigmund Freud, whom he says he studied under in Vienna. Now the record can be righted with the inclusion of Aleister Crowley, the Beast, 666. Thank you for listening, folks. I'm Alex Aquarius. Until next time, I'm out. Please hit like or subscribe.